Excuse me, I have the honor of welcoming you all here tonight to this very special place. My name is Carol Menkiti. My husband was Ifeanyi Menkiti, who died a little over 4 years ago. But me and my 4 children now are the owners of the store. And we welcome the blessing of James as the manager. And we've had such a wonderful outpouring of young people who volunteered to assist here. So it's been quite a blessing. But I know that this meant so much to my husband, this store, and he considered it a sacred place. And he would come and sit in here, I remember, and come home and tell me about the people, sometimes just students. He would sit in a chair and watch how they responded to the books in the store. And sometimes one would sit on the floor and for hours be reading and reading the books. But the books have been expanded from all over the world. So it is a wonderful place. And thank you for coming tonight for a very special reading.
Hi, I'm Alan Shapiro, and I have the even greater honor to introduce Dan Tobin. When you are introducing a truly great book, the introduction should be very short, and you should get out of the way so that all of you can hear as much of the book as possible. So I am not going to say much, except I'm going to read a little bit from the wonderful introduction by Ryan Wilson, which he says, to read Daniel Tobin's tripartite poem, The Mansions, is to feel a frisson of life's grandeur, of its majesty and mystery. Emerson writes that looking at the stars awakens a certain reverence in us, and reading The Mansions may do the same, may awaken in us a heightened awareness of how unlikely, how rare and precious, how sacred all life is, and how unthinkably superabundant. As John in 14:2 has it, there are many mansions in my Father's house. So you have to imagine 3 great intellectuals, George Lemaitre, Simone Weil, and Teilhard de Chardin. 2 of them scientists as well as theologians, and one a great writer of spiritual angst. I don't know how else to describe Simone Weil. And so imagine those 3 people were put in a particle accelerator. And you were just, they were each, you have each an electron, and you just collide them into each other. And the explosion is the book that you have in front of you, The Mansions, which is one of the most ambitious, as well as greatest, most artful and accomplished books that has been written in my lifetime. And it's a book that anybody who cares about where we are as a species, as a country, as an organic life form should read, because this book really does encapsulate everything from the infinitely large to the infinitely small. It's really one of the best books you will ever have an opportunity to read. Dan.
Thanks, James, for setting it. And Alan, thanks for that absolutely beautiful introduction. I'm very grateful for you all being here. It's great to see friends and new faces as well. And also, Carol, it is a sacred place because of you and Ifeanyi. And so I'm going to read a sampling from all 3 larger sections of the trilogy. And the first section is called From Nothing. And it's on the life of Georges Lemaitre, who is the person who first conceptualized the Big Bang, the idea of the universe beginning in what he called a primeval atom. So there you go. This is the first section in the book. Fountain. To figure from nothing, holiness in perihelion. The one must not proclaim it, but let the matter spin along its poles into the bright entanglements, like two particles of light flung to opposite zones. And still the one moves with and how the other moves. Love's choreography in the elegance of the dance. Though maybe it's more like matter and antimatter, the one canceling the other in a blinding negation, number and Newman locked in their separate estates. You would not collapse them to a point's white heat, but kept them before you, your physics and your faith, the divergent roads with their singular horizon, where the radius of space converges into zero, where what was, is, will be, waxes without boundary into seed and sand grain, a cepheid luster of eyes. News of the minor signature keyed from everywhere, the primal radiation, omnipresent, the prodigal wave arriving from its now that has no yesterday. The proof of your calculus, the tour of the expanse. The evolution of the universe might be compared to a display of fireworks that has just ended, some few red wisps, ashes and smoke. So we stand on a well-cooled cinder to see the fading of suns, to glimpse a vanished brilliance, the origin of worlds. Lemaitre was a Jesuit priest. He's also a physicist. He fought in World War I, and he worked and lived in Belgium during the Holocaust, World War II, and was a resistor during that time. This is from the second movement, I guess, of the first book, and it's a section called Calculus. Now in earshot of you, the scale that shatters scales. 50 freight cars times 50 per car times 1.5 trains per day times 1,066 days equals 4 million Jews resettled to the east, exclusive of the death squads, and each one eclipsed behind the death gate's limit, its prevailing west, and Himmler petitioning the minister to transport, I must have more trains. Among them cattle cars out of Brussels, out of Antwerp via Breendonk and Malines, your seminary within hailing distance of the moated barracks where Obersturmführer Asche assembles them for Auschwitz, Birkenau, Bergen-Belsen, Asche to ash along the sideline track through Louvain. That fall afternoon, your father collapses on a train, and the one who sits beside him wears a yellow star. We have the duty of conscience to strive for resistance, declares His Holiness Van Rooy. And you, good son, charged to attend your mother, Levin, act with prayer like an untestable theorem, listening into the vacuum. But to see the singularity in a sphere composed of dust, to see beyond the given limit to the horizon where light plunges permanently into the void, your dust solution by which space and time contract to nil. How to reconcile the math when the metaphor waxes real. Gravity, graves, cinder clouds, a calculus of stars, red shifting on the rails. This next section is called Tenebrae, which means darkness, for those of you who may be wondering. Oppenheimer is a big movie now. This makes reference to Oppenheimer. His code name was Lord Rapid Rupture. There's actually a section in here that's in Oppenheimer's voice, but I'm not going to read it because I would have to do my Cillian Murphy imitation, and I'm not going to do that. Tenebrae. This shadowgraph performance of familiar life. shadow of an elbow on a shadow table, the shadow ink flowing over shadow paper, the body no more than a spectral orchestration, specks whirling with specks in a greater emptiness, within, without, the fragile, mutable matter of ourselves, flotsam from the quantum sea, emergent or devolved from some more perfect symmetry, broken into world lines and geodesics, cathedral webs of space and time. Statistical magician pulls a rabbit from its hat, us. God does not play dice with the universe, but where is der Alte when you need him? Newton's divine observer, letting each passing solitary sum over history break on him, with our local sufferings, astride the non-local, the solving, unsatisfying, tunneling path of letting it happen. So on the mesa, the Sangre de Cristo, a long roiling symmetry, geometry of light and shade, the Lord rapid rupture assembles the luminaries, subcritical mass to critical mass, to ensure the bomb's tamper attains maximal efficiency. And you, forgotten in your shadow life in the outskirts of hell, consider the passage you struck years before. I think that everyone who believes in a supreme being supporting every life, every action, believes that God is essentially hidden, and may be glad also to see how present physics provides a veil hiding the creation. Imago. But to discern God's will in this will of the wisp world, the seeming random daubs conjuring a picture whole, ice melting, magnetism from dead metal, and time itself a shadow of moments, phase shifted from the everlasting into these vectors of growth and decay. Flatlanders aware, unaware, endowed with a prized biological contraption whereby they know nature does not act by purposes, that nature in itself has no reverence for life. And in your notebooks, with the neat calculations, graphs, your parsing of uncertainty, elliptical space, those passages translated from Ruysbroeck's Tabernacle, this light eternal, engulfing all, a mysterious heat. Shall we call it God's non-locality, everywhere at once, that the eye altering the measure of light, this chamber eye misses, calibrated as it is for predator and prey? Human being is an animal, you wrote, and human being is a child of God. While in the animal world, the transports gain frequency, annihilated cargo in this Goldilocks world with all the dials set for our arrival. Luck like grace and love like gravitation, a force, so the saint dreamed, attracting the scattered sparks, jumbled puzzle to itself. So in your house with friends, you gather again to pray. Transcendence isn't passage, it's adding one life to another. Light drawn to light in the image of every victim's face. And I'll leave off the section on Lemaitre with one of the final sections. This is called Canto. Is it motion itself that makes the day? Or is it the time taken by that motion? Or is it both? The saint asked, searchingly. Deus creator omnium, the measure of mind made by the maker of minds, and time come to existence only observable as time, phase transition to the radio spectrum, pre-recombinant, the primordial light unchanged from the initial sea of light, a television hiss homing everywhere, mysterious, incessant. As to this 20-foot horn where the pigeons have posited their nest, where their white dielectric material seems the source, and Penzias, son of Polish Jews, born the day the Gestapo formed, his father a janitor stoking furnaces in the Bronx, scrubs the antenna clean, again adjusts the cold load, grounding the array. and knows what he hears is light's first word through time's wall unwalled. And you, the priest who foreknew it, envisioned this omnipresence, equation after equation, recline a little easier into your deathbed at the news, the diminuendo never ending, the undermelody of a symphony distantly keyed, like the tune the saint heard, prior to origin, since a song is not given form to become sound, but sound given form to become song. You enter the song. I'm going to move to some sections from the second long poem inside a longer poem, which is called This Broken Symmetry. And it's on Simone Weil, as Alan mentioned. Simone Weil believed that there was more truth and more reality in the past than there was in the future. So this particular part of the larger design runs backwards. It runs from after her death to just before her birth. And so I'll read a few of these. The first one is the opening section. It's by Brooke, which is where she was buried. She adored sunsets, and her last was a flaming host placed gravely on the ocean's tongue, indistinguishable from dawn, the vagrant star, the soul's final morsel. No longer now the wasted figure self-starved, the sky spread above the ceiling, above the bed, the huge refuge, as though this plot had always been, would always be her portion, and all the vastness nascent in that fold, flowering emptily. I am a badly cut off piece of God. A wind blowing east across the channel to Gravelines stirs the border of native trees, stirs them classically. Their limbs broadcast nothing of the ancient news. Their bodies bend pliant with each prevailing sway. Let the universe be to my hand a blind man's stick, another body to my soul, my death, no importance. I am the color of dead leaves, an unnoticed insect. Now, above her hollow in earth, a few friends circle, then kneel, where in time a belated stone will rest, where they pray now, where now one throws a bouquet to crest the plain wood box, and her slenderest stem cut that fixed her to her waiting. While the summoned priest unshowing turns back from his mistaken train through the crowds, numb, that in time will be new crowds to settle beyond the trees and queues for cinema world. How grandly fleet the light in each commodious cave. This is called Decreation, and it's one of her central ideas. It's to make oneself uncreated, as if one could actually do that. Decreation. But to enter the uncreated, nothing's naked open sea, before God abandoned God to these various forms of hunger, gravity riveted plumb in every scattered part, and each flung I like a standing pole to blot the infinite, as if creation at its root were rooted in cross purposes. My great desire is to lose all will, lose all personal being. What at best is God but a beggar in this world, emergent as when an ocean recedes into itself and shores appear, never once again, but for the first time, a sloth, a seething, but in the self's self-possessed imagining of a universe beyond which in emptiness the beggar whispers secretly self-renouncing song, for only God can love God. Yet in this broken symmetry, our love, she said, should stretch across all of space, spread equally in every portion of it. So how does it manifest this knowing of beauty, of bridges, all things metaxu, metaphors to lead us out, and even evil a form of mercy? This world at once the barrier, the closed door, and the way through, from one to another, and then to God. And this passing fictive I, born to really die, to be but a little pile of brute matter, how does it become the bird with golden wings that pierces through the egg of the world? It must wait, like Electra, for the dead Orestes to return. Like Christ in Gethsemane, God waiting in God's absence, like a beggar, God waiting for God under the olive trees. This is in the voice of Gustav Tobin, who was an acquaintance of Simone Weil. It's a polyphonic poem, lots of different voices. I'm only reading a couple of them. So this is in Gustav Tobin's voice, and it's his assessment of Simone Weil when she went to work the fields picking grapes. Harvest. Like someone who has spent long hours among the vines, prematurely old, bent, that's how she looked to me that day we met in Avignon, who hadn't picked yet a single cluster, her face wan, faded like a fresco angel in the Palais du Pape. Only her eyes magnificent, only her eyes alone triumph in that shipwreck of beauty, with their look of something foreign to this world. She refused our room in San Marcel, chose the ruin earth floored beside the wood, its scatter of rat merd, its pine needle mattress and peasant's hearth, that one small window from which she'd view the Rhone. Her fairy tale house she'd stay, rest, fresh fruit, delicious air, the fear she felt of losing herself among sensual pleasures. One time I found her sitting still on the tree trunk in front, lost in contemplation, and sensed just then a correspondence, the beauty of that soul and the landscape's tender majesty. But how raw her friends suffered her will for immolation, she who chided me for withholding my true measure of stripping myself away. For her, the beauty of the world was the mouth of a labyrinth. In the center, there God waits to eat the soul. So in Saint Julien, she joined with harvesters, disappearing among rows of pendant grapes, embodied wine, cutting free the perfectly nurtured, bruise-colored fruit, hour by hour for days, her sandaled feet bleeding, purifying her, she'd say, until I see the landscape as it is when I am not there. This next poem is called Dordogne, and it's that's where the caves of Lascaux are. And this is kind of an imaginary one. I'm speaking here to, or the poet speaker is speaking here to somebody named Ravida, who was the person who discovered the caves of Lascaux. Yes, Ravida, to follow the rabbit down its winding hole below the limestone cliffs near Montagnac, Périgord Noir with its oak forests, where the river flows breakneck ahead from ancient Clouseau, and lookout huts clotted for refuge against Rome, this parcel scorched for Aquitaine, its singers accorded to war, that exceeding music, to descend again into the whisper chamber, stone veil, womb of the species, and this time bring her with you, this scion, our secular saint, while above the latest conqueror clamors with its cavalcade. In this commodious cave, in the hall of bulls, aurochs rear parietal among dun horses, a great horned stag, its antlers flaring like ganglia along the swelled boss, axial, synaptic, pigments blotted, swabbed, tube sprayed in the tallow light. So the galleries unfold, breed-like in their earthen basilica, shaft, passageway, apse and nave, rhino, bison, feline, bear. There, among the graven lattices and symbols, 1,000 overlapping and entangled, there in the darkness, where the first imaginers lifted their long-flown scaffolds, a bird-headed man floats, stick figure, as though he'd risen one beside one of his woolly extinctions, the vision, first inkling glimmer, a primal sprout of the monkey mind. Above, new gods engrave their crooked crosses, yellow stars. Let her sit a while underground, alone in silence, with silence. Let her lift her hand once to feel the rootless at the root. And I'll finish this section on Simone Weil with a poem called Little Portion. She was a great lover of St. Francis. And this happens to be St. Francis's feast day for those of you who follow such things. So in honor of that, Little Portion. In the eye between the Anschluss and the blood fires of Guernica, like a brilliant point of light beyond the Duce's folded arms, she has entered the Chiesetta, Porzioncola, the little portion where the saint would kneel in prayer, where the raw wounds scored themselves into his feet and hands, his palms open, arms stretched wide, like one who embraced the firing squad. Tracer rounds of love shot from God's body to his own. Not in the great church, abominable, built around this cell, not under the high dome's atmosphere, but hunkered here, she feels for the first time alone something stronger than I. Though isn't God withdrawn from the universe, powerless within it? That compels her now to go down on her knees. Outside, brother sun pours over Umbrian hills his canticle of light. Sister moon hides patiently behind day's blue veil, while brother wind and sister water flow down and through the olive trees on the low descending slopes of sister earth. Somewhere under brother fire's stars, the saint is preaching to his congregation of birds, and all the wolves of Gubbio, benignly murderous, bowing, offer their paws to his hands. And if it must be sacrificed, this nothing, this created self, like the saint in his transito, is it only cold matter sifting into itself again, swap of energies, the nameless zero sum, not the sudden combustion of bluebirds from a raven flock, as little sister bodily death calls all her playmates home. Need a quick slug. I'm going to read now just from the last movement, and I'll read the first poem, not first poem, the first section of the poem, and a couple of a few others. This is called His Stone. This is called At the Grave of Théodore Deschardins, and the first movement of this long poem within the larger design. Inanimate objects talk. So this is his stone, gravestone talking. And I think that's it. He's buried actually in New York State, very close to the Hudson River, just north of Poughkeepsie. His stone. Again, this dawn-lit incandescence through the yew trees, and down the slope, the river strolling the length of itself in every pearl and ripple. When years ago they set me to attest his life among the growing human increase under grass, I had long been lifted from the ground mass, soft-grained, sun-blanched, vaguely crystalline, his name cut into me plainly with his beginning and his end, and the frozen earth unwilling to lay him to rest, for this man to sleep the sleep of trust, the sleep of seed, in the winter field. It is a terrifying thing to be born, to find oneself without having willed it, swept along, still I hear him say, on a torrent of fearful energy. Or maybe I only think I hear him, as if I were his god of iron, a childhood's distant dream, infinitely durable, not my weathering granite shield against effacement. What comes at the very end, he said, is the adorable. To this padlocked field behind the shuttered church, I watch them swing the gate and scan the identical rows along the tarred path pillowed by decades of moss until they find me, each one leaving their gift of stone on my crest. And sometimes it is in that stillness as if I am the river moving along with the layers, light pouring over me, pouring through me, light speeding from so far away it has no past or future. This next one is called Garment and Corpus. And this is a more elusive voice, not quite as solid as a stone. Most of what I wear no one can see. My nakedness is nothing ghosting each barely probable array, from lack to leap, to face to galaxy, till all you know collapses into now. What this man called the bloom of matter's marvelous garment in the flesh, a breed just visible on the edge of what will be, was, and is. To walk these bustling human streets, to go astray in Shanghai, Louvain, Paris, and Rome, or clamor Brescia, to find in the teeming dishabille the shards, some sidelong glancing image of my resplendence. One must have a sight line honed by longing love that would stitch in its bright gaze what came before and what will come on ahead, and so fathom the circuit from the arrow of the line. My haunt, my harrowing, like particles of light fired through a regnant screen, each double of the other launched to opposite zones, till the action of his science and the action of his faith keep impossible counsel across the shattering gulf. What vision but mine narrows the brash infinities out of the improbable rattle bag of what might be, warp woof of a great thought, not a great machine. He saw it first at the front in that dying soldier's eyes, the agony like a plumb line down a bottomless well, ascending there with my own, transfiguring into joy. Teilhard de Chardin also fought in World War I, and he was basically banished by the church for 25 years or more to China, where he did a lot of archaeological work and did a lot of work finding the early fossils of proto-humans and so forth. And none of his writing was allowed to be published in his lifetime. So this is drawing from some of that sensibility. This particular section is in the voice of somebody named George Barber, who is one of his acquaintances, but also a colleague in this work of archaeology and paleontology. To fall forward stage by stage till the end of the world. That's what he would say, my old friend, with his kit box and breviary, his pack of jobs, him chain smoking them year in, year out, from Tientsin to Transvaal, field notes and skulls, his eyes keen for every jigsaw bit of bone, Sinanthropus, Australopithecus, Miocene, Pleistocene, all the way to this later infancy, his thinking envelope of consciousness expanding, he held like a living net, one mind woven with all minds, drawn to the ahead. At Chukutien, I'd use crayons to track sediment with colors on my notepad. He would keep gradations like prisms in his head, drawings sharp as photographs. Nights at the fire, we would talk of his god of tension that carries the species on through every random spur. Like the time on the steps of the Yamen when a mule struck him with its hind leg on the temple, the blister the size of a bloody pigeon's egg. He quoted Li Po. It's as hard to travel in Sichuan as to climb to heaven. And then, when my son died, near his own death, he wrote, I am convinced what looks like meaningless catastrophe transforms itself into blessing. And even those graves at Xingling, no stones, no names. Look at the hands, spit painted on cave walls as if raised to brace a fall. No, they're moving. They're making their way through rock. Okay, I'm going to read now. I'll finish up with just a few sections, 4 sections from the last movement of the book. This book on At the Grave of Teilhard de Chardin, and the whole kit and caboodle, as they say. So the context for this last section is there are no section titles here. It's just one straight run through. And when one goes to the sacrament of reconciliation in a Catholic setting, you usually begin by saying, bless me, Father. So this is me as if Teilhard de Chardin were my confessor, and I'm speaking to him throughout this. This is 11 sections. I'm not reading all 11, you'll be glad to know, but this is the part that's all in terza rima, pretty much spot on terza rima. There's some off rhyming, so you might be able to hear that. Here we go. Just make sure I know where I'm going here. Yeah. Got it. Bless me, Father. What is this old shattering emptiness, as if a cavern had opened inside? So with everything I find myself infinitesimal, harrowed into a past abyss, while on ahead I know myself, with all, to be rushing breakneck toward a future going, even box-less figure cut off midway, genius meeting its end before its ending. All the sounds of created being, you said, are fused, without confusion, everything sustained in a single note until all the powers of the soul resound, now composed into an ineffably simple vibration. The one, no doubt, you believe St. Francis heard, bewitching and seraphic. You heard it in the rucked clamor of trench and redoubt, and from it divine the score, orchestral, symphonic, of a milieu enfolding, unfolding, it must be so, you held, like Beethoven of his quartet. For either there is escape somewhere for thought and personality, or the world is a tremendous mistake. Decades now, you are gone into that ascendant heart, while in my neighbor's yard, a lattice work of clematis riots purple blue, star womb on the trellis, risen, ecstatic, sustaining another spring, an astonishment of beauty transfigured from the random. Teach me to see in all this divergent errancy something of your fullness. Teach me to listen, to hear one chord of the unfinishables, that I too might enter the song. Bless me, Father. This house made of many mansions, matter self-organizing, shaping itself into multitude, shoreless sums of galaxies in a grain's breadth of sand held up to the sky, expands into nothing inwardly, no boundary, only the quickening volume of space from laboratory stars, and like the negative around a vase that dedicates the shape to the twin darknesses as if inferred from infrared, flowers there unseen. What am I, Father, but one particle of consciousness adrift, which with others amidst this muddle of a species, its prodigal numbers fast forwarding in the crib. In the mansion of the virus, the limitless is passé. Bird-faced bloodletters, hawk-beaked with ambergris, goggle glasses eyes hover among the suffering, their long robes suddenly rubberized, makeshifted into spacesuits, scrubs, as out of each raw throat juts the winding transparent branch, blunt harbinger of the metamorphosis, crux of your last penumbra. For evil is inevitable in the course of a universe that evolves in time. Once in gold Egyptian light, you saw the range like a saw blade, Sinai's massive, a horizon like a knife edge along the lowering sky. Today, my garden keeps faith in its fragile tillage, larkspur, sage, salvia, dead nettle, creeping time. Bless me, Father. A roll of the loaded chemical dice fashioned the fourfold language of a cell that read itself, the root of life at watch miraculous. To perceive what is chance and divined as a braid, as communion, God's long disclosure longed for of a still deeper double life of God and the world until universe and earth align, an intelligent mirror of all in all, I believe is what you ask of me. Today, I read how the mannequin's wing feathers were strum, bow like a violin, with such resonant speed, they stridulate to F sharp G, the bird's wing song, a brilliant come hither to its mate. It is only beauty happening again as it does with utter decadence, like the Argus's golden spheres or the peacock's eye spots that Darwin saw as a scandal to selection, as if threads of superabundance were now at work, aesthetics over function, or the teleology of play, and everything evolving in beauty for beauty's sake. Which is not to say that the hawk imperturbable on its bough and the murder with its urgent cause pretends no mene of the incomplete or fallen. Matter as host and cross is what invites my awe, the way the saint at chapel this time took the bread and resolved at once that all he'd known was straw. Two more. Bless me, Father. Till I consider for the figure of your irresistible vortex, which spins into its life the infinite stuff of things, the reality of God as divine attractor, like a bob pendulum whose apparently chaotic orbit draws everything into pattern, order, butterfly, and flow, neither turbulence nor equilibrium, which in the circuit of its emergence, everything likewise emerges in tow, like eyes arising from water, spirals, waves to become organs in dynamic frames in which we know. Above our siphoned atmosphere, great mirrors home their lattice honeycomb for the most ancient light, pillars risen creational in a nebulous gaseous womb, gradient rays, red shifting galaxies in the blank fields where, when the first far clusters lens into presence, each a glittering brooch pinned, spinning to the veil. Now look down into an inner sky where the electron keeps pace with the timeless until I bend and find its many paths in an instant converging to only one. In this double vision, double of eternity and time, the fontal stays hidden in an image glimpsed, a trace that I know to be my own, but distant, unrealized, and drawn by loving hands from the vagrant source. What someone sees my seeing in this desire I seek. You looked into creation's dust and saw a radiant face. And I'm just going to read the last section of the whole thing. And this is a palindrome. So if you hear repetition, it's because the first part is reads down and then it reverses itself. So it becomes a mirror image. some wellspring of creation, live in the scattered sunlight. It pours itself at dawn along the single inlet shore, the rising sun being born, center of deep delight at the heart of the world, and the water a mirror entirely reflecting sky. Here again is your paten, here again your chalice in the vessel of matter in which the all is empty, nothing abandoned. Beyond these harbor islands, it is the human city, visible from the tidal hallows here at world's end, that feels like the passing planet we must grieve right now that the planet too has risen. Let me hold in my gaze some filament of eternity. Let me hold in my gaze some filament of eternity right now that the planet too has risen, that feels like the passing planet we must grieve. Visible from the tidal hallows here at world's end, beyond these harbor islands, it is the human city in which the all is emptied, nothing abandoned. Here again, your chalice in the vessel of matter entirely reflecting sky. Here again is your paten at the heart of the world, and the water a mirror, the rising sun being born center of deep delight. It pours itself at dawn along this single inlet shore, some wellspring of creation, live in the scattered sunlight. Thanks.
We're talking now.
Alan will join Dan for conversation.
Also
Yeah, others.
questions and questions as well. And I just really would magnificent reading. And God, I have so many questions that I could ask you. And I guess the best one, just to sort of open a conversation, would be this book did not spring fully formed from your head.
No.
So how did it evolve? And one of the themes in the book is the transition from the phase transition from the quantum to the Newtonian classical universe, how it got from that to that. What's the quantum origins of this, and then how did it get to the Newtonian book that we have in front of us?
The primeval atom of it was actually me watching a TV show about physics, 20th century physics, and they mentioned George Lemaitre, and I had never heard of him, but the thing that struck me was, here is this Jesuit priest who was actually quite the physicist, and Einstein actually said he was a better mathematician than Einstein. Even in the movie, Einstein says, "I'm not so good at math." Oppenheimer movie, so that's actually true. So that got me going, and I wanted to do some investigation of Lemaitre. So I did. I found what I could find. There wasn't a lot. He had written books, but he's not, like a famous physicist at all. His life was spent in Louvain, Belgium, and he was invited to go to Princeton, like those people in the movie, but he couldn't go because he couldn't leave his mother back in Belgium. So he was there. There is an archive to Lemaitre at the University of Louvain-la-Neuve, and I went there to do research. And so I actually did look at his notebooks. In one of the poems I read tonight, I referenced Jan van Ruysbroek, who is a Flemish mystic whom he loved tremendously and read him tremendously, at the same time as he was writing these amazing equations, figuring out that as far as we know, this may change, of course, right? It's science, that the universe began in an explosive singularity. And so I could read in his own hand those reflections, and met his nephew. And so that got me deeply stirred, and I wrote that probably for 3-4 years. And over the course of writing that, I was feeling that it was actually a threesome, not just a one-off. But the first book, From Nothing, was actually published in 2016. And it was, I got a nice award for that one, but I didn't think it was enough. So I I was talking to Alan earlier about this. I was kind of haggling back and forth. What are the other ones? I knew I wanted to write a poem on Teilhard de Chardin for a long time. I first started reading Teilhard de Chardin when I was actually an undergraduate, and I was deeply impressed and moved. I don't know if I'm quite as optimistic as he is. That might be my problem. But then I was trying to figure out who the middle one was going to be. And for a while, I thought Dorothy Day, but no, it had to be Simone Weil, who I also been reading for a very long time. And so I just delved into a combination of research and you know, encountering, I didn't want it to be all research. So there's mentions of a garden and my garden. And so I wanted it to have the touch of real life ultimately to it, and to make research try to come alive. I actually am a great believer in research. Megan Marshall, where I teach at Emerson College, does a course on research writing for graduate students, and that has informed not only poems, but nonfiction writers and fiction writers. So I hope Megan may be out there in the digital world. But I wanted to give her a nod for that because I do believe in that. So I guess that's it. I wanted to pursue the thing to its full. The shape of the thing is I got that pretty early on. I didn't know where it was going to be. I didn't preconceive it. I just engaged it. So there are 33 cantos in each book, and 3 larger parts to each book, 11, 11, 11. And each canto is 8 tercets of 3 lines, right? So that's 24. So you do the same thing the second time. So that was the form I discovered, and the same thing the last time. So everything has got to work there, inside that. So the compression is advantageous, I believe. Poems do work well through compression, having some limit. It doesn't have to be, a sonnet or a villanelle or a sestina, but the engagement and in finding the expressive limit, right? That's the key from my perspective anyway. So 33, 33, 33 is 99. There's no 100th, except there is, and it winds, I didn't read it, it winds its way through. It's a couplet, like a double helix, moving its way through all of them. And then it doesn't end because it weaves on back to the beginning. So it's like Alan called it a little Ouroboros, a little snake that eats its tail, or a little, endless engine spinning around. So that took a while to figure all that stuff out. I was actually planned on traveling to places. I didn't read something called Celestial Mountains, which are in China. I wanted to travel there and experience them. Something intervened. It's called COVID-19. We are all familiar with that. And so I could not travel anywhere. So I used that inability to travel. What do you do when you have a limit? You take advantage of it. I just dove in and had to imagine those places. And imagine what would if the Celestial Mountains could talk, what would they say, right? And so that was it. Or the wake of a boat that Teilhard took on the Red Sea. What happens? What would the wake of the boat say about this guy riding in the boat? And so I had to imagine my way into that. So I hope that answers some questions.
That's great. And people have, oh, good.
And here you work in communication with Dante, as you wrote this, not only in terms of the structure or of his immersion in cosmology and science generally, and his immersion in God. Are there other aspects of Dante that guided you on your journey?
Fear of comparison, except for Dan T. But I have to say, I wanted, I think, trying to hold yourself up to the highest possible aspiration as an artist, as a poet, or as anything, fiction writer, doesn't matter, right? If you're cooking, highest possible aspiration. So why not? I mean, that's a homage to Dante. I'm not going to put myself in the same, line as the Divine Comedy, but you know what? I wanted that resonance, and I wanted that to be a homage to that incredible work that is inexhaustible, and wanted to take the themes that both further and haunt and subvert the 20th century and our own time, and to draw them together in such a way that it doesn't just become an exercise in intellectual mulling, but actually is something that engages what John Donne would have called the combination of deep emotion and deep intellect. That's the aspiration anyway. Yeah. Sarah?
Hi, Dan. So I can't help but notice the cover of your book has a staircase.
It does.
And you might know the question I'm about to ask, but I'm wondering if this image is kind of a repurposing of another famous winding stair. Gate.
Well, very good, Sarah. Yeah. Sarah is graduated recently. Now, about what is it, a year now, Sarah?
Just a few months.
Wow, it just seems, yeah, she graduated from Emerson with an MFA. She's a wonderful poet, and I had the good fortune, and my wife Christine had the good fortune of having Sarah in a number of classes, including one that took place in Ireland, in which we went to Tor Valley Lee. So yes, I don't think I actually made the connection when I was thinking of that, but my publisher, one of the Four-Way Books, wonderful press, Martha Rhodes, the founder and publisher there now, and Ryan Murphy, who was also deeply involved in making the cover, thought a staircase would be a good idea because of the double helix idea. Right. I had first in mind, I was talking to Alan about this earlier, one of the inside spires of La Sagrada Familia, which is a magnificent building. But it didn't really look right. It didn't work. And they said, nah. So I literally looked through, I'm not joking, 27,000 different stairway images. I'm not joking. I was like, they all said, Tobin maybe has a low CD, possibly. But I found that, and there were two others that I thought were pretty good, but I really liked that one. And I said, well, this is what I found. And they all liked that one too. So it's meant to be, what you don't want to think called a mansion is a picture of a big house, because a mansion really means a temporary dwelling. It's on the way. That's the origins. I use that as a beginning, as one of the epigraphs to the book. It's really about, a mansion is not a big house. In my house are many mansions. That means that it's not, the idea is not that it's this grand palace. It's actually a place to dwell. And that and typically it's also, in the earliest meaning, it's a temporary place, because you move through the desert or wherever you're going, and you have to take those down and keep going. So that's kind of the ambiguity I'm interested in there.
Yeah, so I have a couple of questions. One is regarding your Ouroboros structurally. I wonder if it is line by line, or is it like the first 2 lines? How exactly is it concocted, the Ouroboros?
The Ouroboros, oh yes. When I wrote the first couplets, the double helix, I think it was 3 and then 3. I can't do the math. See, what a great physicist. I can't do the math. We got to call on George Lemaitre for this. But then I thought, this has to weave its way all the way through. Right, it has to follow all the way through. So 4 of 6 lines. So it's there at the beginning. It's in between the first and the second. It's in between the second and the third, and it's at the end. And it weaves its way in. I won't read it now. I'll let you read it, because I'd have to move through the book. But that actually, in honesty, came to something I thought of when I was actually quite young. And I wasn't sure if I was going to put this in anything, but I did. And it was a notion that is all being becomes all, which is a kind of circular motion, which also spells out the Hebrew word for Abba, Father, not the, and it's a chiasmus. It's a chiasmus, right? It's also a chiasmus. So that's the last one weaves back there, and then it swings back again to the beginning. An experience of acceleration into what transcends us, but you can't represent that.
And in the spirit of understanding the philosophical movement throughout the book, you begin with a section in which something comes from nothing, or everything comes from nothing.
Right.
And then eventually you get to the teleologist, like the German of Paul
Mm-hmm.
Celan. So is it like increasing in complexity? Is that the idea? Or how does the teleology of the German of Paul Celan inform your poetic?
I think it's in conversation with Simone Weil. From nothing, there's a beginning, right? At least at the beginning of that, there's a quotation from Lemaitre I do use, which says you have to hold these two things separately. To say that something's from nothing is not really a scientific statement. It's a theological statement, but he was himself a scientist, so therefore he took great pains in separating those things out, and yet they're still simultaneously coexisting in the same person. When Pope Pius the 12th said, "See, Lemaitre has proved that everything comes from nothing," Lemaitre went ballistic. He hated it, and he stormed into his classroom and said, "This is crazy. It's not what I mean at all." Right? So they believed, as I said earlier, we are moving into terrible territory. We are actually going to go back into caves from her perspectives. We're not, it's not a forward movement for the species from her perspective. She's very doubtful about that. And that's where Teilhard comes in, because Teilhard is looking in just the opposite fashion. So I wanted that potentially unresolvable conflict or double vision to inhabit the piece. Yeah, thanks. Great questions. Anybody else?
One question I had was about a powerful line you had. I believe it was in the middle of the you had it about said that you'll see the landscape when you're not there.
Yeah.
I was wondering if that was a more philosophical, scientific, psychological, what kind of approach were you taking?
She actually said it. I'm quoting her there, which is just astonishing, right? That's where something falls in your lap, and I'm not going to kind of nod every time I'm splicing one of their voices into the piece, because when you read it, you will see where that happens. It's in quotation. There are in the back, I have notes that say where these things are from. But the challenge there, this goes back to the first question, is the challenge of weaving in this material in a way that doesn't necessarily stay absolutely spot on, because the shape of the poem has to alter because they're not necessarily writing in six beats per line. They're not reading, they're not stating something in 6 beats per line. So there's some alteration that's going on there, but it's basically her.
Can I just ask that, since you mentioned 6 beats per line, and I knew that just the hexameter, and while you were reading, your left leg was beating out.
I didn't even know that.
No,
yeah,
well,
yeah.
no, but I was watching, and so I was just wondering that. How did you settle on why the hexameter, not the pentameter? How did you? Was that just an
instinct?
thing?
It was intuitive. It was instinctive. I just didn't feel that.
You get the benefit of the pentameter, but then there's a little bit more modification.
I just felt that the way things were going, it was an expansive move.
Yeah.
And I actually started writing in pentameter, and it didn't feel right. It didn't feel right. So I have to break this. And I do. I mean, I have a lot of poems in pentameter. So I just felt I had to break it.
Yeah.
And get a little wider there.
The hexameter, kind of a lot goes into freeze, da 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 da, which is very conversational, which seems to me to be very appropriate for this big conversation that this book is between these 3 ways of looking at things. So to me, the hexameter, I was kind of back here bobbing my head too, because I could see that that's what it was. So if I hadn't seen it, I might not have been able to totally hear that. But I just wondered if that makes sense to you.
Thanks. It makes perfect sense to me. I didn't plan it, but 6 is obviously 2 times 3. So there's, 8 is an even number, 2 is an even number. There's odds and evens. There's a bit of numerological intuition taking place in here too. Which may be Dante, sort of Dante.
Yeah. I thought I noticed enough alliteration in the section on the Metra that it seemed intentional.
Mhm.
Is that true, or was that part of the mechanics of the poem, or is that just sort of?
I didn't sort of plan ahead. Okay, now's the alliterative moment, but it is there in terms of ear, right? It's ear training and instinctively following a certain kind of cadence and musical effect. And so what you want, at least what I want, is to at some point feel inhabited. Not that I'm doing something, but to feel I know that sounds hokey, but that's what I want. And if I can fool myself into that, then I'm really happy. Because then I can follow it. I can follow it. That's the thing.
I think that the selection that you read demonstrated the really deep theological roots, but I also imagine that in your research there was a lot of scientific concepts, like with Lemaitre and the paleontology and all that. Did you find that this scientific investigation changed the way you thought about or articulated these theological ideas? Did they complement each other?
I think that's true. I mean, I've always been interested in physics. I say that as a complete amateur, somebody who could not do the math. But conceptually, I'm really interested in it. And so I digested, I don't know how many books, but a lot of books, on not only on physics, but on, the origins of human being. Biology, I wanted to ingest all of that, and again, not to spew out information, but to let it kind of integrate itself into my imaginative engagement with these people. So I do believe science and theology are in conversation, even though in our present culture we split them totally apart. And I don't mean to say that to confuse one with the other, but ultimately they're looking for ultimate answers. I'm not a Richard Dawkins kind of guy myself, but so I wouldn't agree with that complete removal of the theological religious perspective. But I definitely think that ultimately, even though they're completely different methods, they're after something that enlarges our perception of who we are, what we are, where we're going. What is that the painting by Gauguin? Who are we? Where do we come from? Where are we going? Yeah, I love that title. That's basically everything, isn't it? Right. That's it.
Except that, sorry, go ahead.
The one part that really left out of me, I think it was the first part of the in the middle of that song, where the sunset and the sun setting is like the host coming on the tongue. I don't think I've ever heard that before. I think it's incredible, but was that based on some reading you found where she talked about sunset? Or
No, that was me. That actually was me. I didn't read the last section of Lemaitre, which is a blood red host at night, right? So that image of the host, sun as host, that's actually the pivot point that moves from the first to the second.
I just have one quick thing, in the same way that there's a kind of mystery at the heart of the transition from the quantum to the classical vision of the universe, physical, physicist universe. At the heart of all of the science and the theology is the Holocaust.
Yes. Yes.
That's unresolved, and it's just there. There's never.
It's not resolvable.
There's no theodicy. It's just unredeemed.
Yeah.
And that's the black hole at the center of this whole book.
Yes, it is. and it keeps, it occurs in the Vey book, and it obviously in the Metra. Yeah, all of them. So, and there's nothing, as soon as you try to answer that, you're creating an offense.
Absolutely.
You know, so you leave it in hollowness. It can't answer, it can't be answered. Certainly not any answer we know of.
Okay.
Hi, Ted.
In the portions of the book that I have read, there's an alternation between the quotidian details of individual lives and these poetic ruminations and refocusing of scientific data in an almost mystical language. And one of the things that I'm aware of as I read this material is that the vacillation between the two of them has the feeling of great naturalness. Part of this has to do with the length of the line. Part of it has to do with the trajectory of the terses. But I wonder if you could say anything that comes to mind about what I just said to you.
I hope you're right, Ted. Then I'm very happy about that. Yeah. One, two.
I just wanted to know, in shaping a bunch of poems that are within your own poetic voice, but are also trying to articulate and make legible these really difficult concepts from biology and physics in some ways, especially to appropriate some of that language. If that makes sense. To use some of that language from physics, how you approach the issue of legibility versus the issue of musicality.
No, that's a great question. Yeah.
Could you repeat the last part of the question? I just didn't hear it.
How do I negotiate legibility of the terms and the diction, various kinds of diction, and of the musicality? That's a great question. And I think it's what's that? Yeah, there you go. Listen to Alan. I mean, I don't think scientific language is without its musicality. So therefore, it's a matter of feeling through line by line, moment by moment in the poem, how to integrate these two seemingly disparate kinds of music, and also to make the leap between perceptions about reality that seem to be divergent, but when in fact in the perception and in the music you're holding together essentially opposites. So I think good music does do that, right? Hopefully you're right, and I think complex, interesting music is simultaneously convergent and divergent, and nothing breaks away and nothing solidifies into a single kind of tonality, but it holds together multiple tonalities, which is why you got a little bit of this, the polyphony. This is a polyphonic piece. There are lots of people talking beside me in here, or it's me, with my, Robert Oppenheimer, Cillian Murphy mask on, which I didn't read that one, but it's in there. So you have to negotiate. You don't want everybody, if there's a number of people speaking in the piece too, and they're different people, obviously, then you don't want them all to sound the same. Right? It's like, so you have to kind of deal with that as well. So there's a little bit of acting, as they say, on the page. You have to, in the privacy of the workspace, try to inhabit the mind of somebody very different than you are, and probably of a different time than you are. But that's the interesting part from my perspective. That's when you get out of yourself, for crying out loud. Somebody else had a hand up?
Yeah, so Simone Weil's her carbon bio was a famous mathematical physicist working on quantum mechanics.
Yes.
And I'm sorry.
Her brother was under
Yeah.
Yes, and she has this. She has this in her writings, she has actually an article about quantum mechanics, who's I don't want to say escaping, but skeptical. And so the other writers, Lemaitre and Charlotte, are kind of one can interpret them as positive spiritually feelers and thinkers about science. But Simone de Beauvoir was herself exhibited a lot of skepticism.
Yes.
During her life.
Yes.
How did you incorporate that in?
It's all there. I mean, it's working backwards, right? That particular, section or part. So yes, I mean, she had a long communist period that is certainly included, and I have some sections in there about that. Andre makes a couple of appearances, one early on and one later. I didn't read them because I couldn't. I intentionally didn't read just from one. I read across, but yeah, there's one section or one individual canto, however you want to phrase it, called A Tooth, and that's where she says something to the effect of, a brother should be like a tooth, or a brother is like a tooth. It's best when you know it's not there. Yeah. They had a complicated relationship. And then there's one in a couple in Andre's voice where he talks about calling her a trolless. So there's details in that.
So do you think her reaction about quantum mechanics in this essay might be like sibling rivalry or something?
Oh, I mean, I think there was sibling rivalry there. I mean, I don't mean to be, kind of psychologist of the dead, but I think there was definitely tension. When they were very young, a friend of the mother's came up and said, "He is genius itself, and she is beauty." And after that, migraine headaches. Yeah. So she was obviously reacting against being pigeonholed in many different ways in terms of gender too, which gets into which I do passing. There's one in the voice of Simone de Beauvoir. She admired Simone Weil, but Simone de Beauvoir speaks about her encounter with Simone. And Gertrude Stein is in there as well. Yeah, who never met Simone Weil, but I pretended that they did. Picasso also makes an appearance. He also never met, as far as I know, Simone Weil, but I made that part up too.
Saw her walking.
Well, yeah, I made believe they were in Paris all around the same time, and they lived very close to each other, right? In different. Right. So they may have walked by each other on the street. So I figured, let's go with it. Why not? When Gertrude Stein speaks, she speaks like Gertrude Stein. I do an imitation of Gertrude Stein. Anybody else?
Any other questions? Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank everybody online. And thank you, Alan.
Books on sale. Dan will be signing books. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Great audience.
Oh, great audience. So you're coming on, I think it's the 9th. I'll be there.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's do it. Safe bet.
And yeah, right. And
Thank you.